Hi, everybody, and welcome to the week 4 Fireside Chat for Educational Leadership 655, Pupil Services and Non-Discrimination. I am David, your instructor, and this is our week 4 Fireside Chat. So I'm recording this a little bit early. It is February 3rd, and on Wednesday, I will be doing an interview with Hector Solis to focus on child grooming and sex trafficking, which will then be a podcast, and it will also have another version, which Hector and I are working on for Sprigio.com out of Santa Barbara, and we have a third version that will be consolidated and used for this class. So that's going to be very helpful, and I am asking for Sprigio to consider allowing me to use some documents that I use exclusively with that company and some of their clients on how to educate schools about identifying possible grooming of students and how to then respond to that. It's very difficult, actually. Statistically, 1 out of 80 to 100 grooming incidents is reported. So, and reasons for that: one, groomers are very efficient in what they do, and the other part is victim blaming or victim shaming. Very prevalent. So we're going to talk about that. I've never shared that before in this class because I've never had those resources available to me. As an expert witness, there are cases right now that are kind of lining up in this area. Schools where parents are claiming that the school did not do meet the standard of care, I guess, in regard to educating youth about how to identify and how to report grooming. Students have been victims of grooming, whether it be by somebody affiliate with the school or, outside of the school, similar to, I guess, what bullying would be, but then that information never came forward into the school system, or if it did come forward, it didn't have a way to be processed. I don't know. It's very complicated, but there were 2 recent settlements on the West Coast, and most of my work I do, again, is on the West Coast. One was $8 million and one was $9 million, found that the school and counselors did not meet the standard of care for teaching students to identify and then also to report grooming, and then also the school's responsibility to have a response to that, which might have involved bringing in law enforcement. I don't know all the details on those cases. I wasn't asked to be a part of those. I was asked by a Wisconsin district a week ago to consider helping on a case, which I don't know if it's really a case at this point, but it does involve counseling services and following up with various aspects of meeting the application for pupil services and non-discrimination. I did decline that opportunity, though, because I don't consult in Wisconsin. It's a conflict of interest. I know too many people here, and I can work anywhere in the country. It's much easier if you ever do this type of work on the side of expert witness or consulting. It's easier to not do it in your home state because you do know so many people over a career that I think it just gets to be uncomfortable at times. Like in this district, I knew one of the administrators there. So, what happens if you find out that, you're making recommendations that the administrator should be doing certain things or whatever? I'd rather have that come from someone that didn't know that person than it come from me. But enough about that. Hey, it's snowing outside. Dun, 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 dun. Daughters are excited. We might get the sledding hill open, which would be great. I currently have a dumpster and our 2 vehicles out in my driveway. Dumpster because we're doing another stage of remodeling for the house. So I have to try to navigate with the snowblower. However, this is going to work tomorrow to clear out the driveway. The good news is I can get to the end of it where the snowplow will pile everything up, and I can chop that down with the snowblower and maybe with a shovel maneuver the rest. But gotta be careful because I don't want to do too much around the cars. So that was my fear when this project started. Our garage now is the workshop for the builders as they work on things. So that's all set up in in that regard. But hopefully, it won't be too long and life will be back to normal with that. I miss parking in my garage, especially in winter. But anyway, I want to thank you for your participation in class. And I also know that some of you have not felt well. You've let me know you've been ill a couple days from school or longer than a couple days. And certainly this is a horrible flu season. We have a student where I'm at, he's been out 2 weeks and probably won't be back next week. And it's something. Take care of yourself. Let me know, like Dave, I've been home 3 days. I hadn't, I might be late on a couple posts or whatever, or, I get it. Okay. I completely get it. But please let me know if something like that does develop. And I want you to take care of yourself. And that is my number one concern, because obviously you're in schools, you're around kids. It's a lot of activity going on right now. And if you do get sick, I don't want this to add if there's a, I didn't get the post in by Thursday, because I've been home the last 2 days or whatever. It's like, let me know. I'll work with you. So a few things. Learning teams. If you haven't already started your division of labor, you should have. So get on that, okay? Get that done. Get working for your case study for Bruce. In the syllabus, it's described very explicitly what you need to do for Bruce. And again, there's divergent ways to put together a safe protocol for Bruce. So I'm not looking for like the one protocol. It's like, do what works, but you're going to be working with people from other districts, and you're going to have some debates about, I think that's part of ADA might, apply. Maybe it doesn't. IDEA, whatever, health plan, things like that. Who we would train, who we wouldn't train. So, the thing is, you learn from going through the process. And I just did a podcast on this tonight. I was on a podcast out east. It's actually a radio show. It's syndicated. And then it was pretty fascinating. I got brought in on that. And we talked about the Hawaii missile crisis. And then I broke that down into some areas because I'm not real settled on how that played out. But then we talked about, the butterfly effect and the Mandela effect. So it was fascinating. It's probably, I think it might have been the biggest show I've been on, although I was a guest on a show in England that was really popular. But so anyway, before the show, the host kind of goes through the debriefing of what you cover. I do this too, but not to this level. And then like Roger Stone was on a couple of weeks ago, and so it was a pretty big time show. And then one of the reason I was on largely was to say, like, the Hawaii missile threat didn't follow the protocol that it should have followed, meaning that you just don't have this local notification of inbound missile through your emergency broadcast system. It doesn't exist. It doesn't happen that way. And I have the show's devoted to that. I'm not going to get into it here, but it goes, through NORAD, STRATCOM, notification of the president, the head of Secretary of Defense, and then there's a decision made through EBS, and that's an EBS notification, which would have specific details, which would go out to the regions impacted. And that's the only way it works, like ever. It's the only way it works. So in order for this to have happened, there had to be some really unusual circumstances. So we get into that. We had a great talk. And then they had a chat room going, and they had a call-in show going too. So, because it's pretty big, and so I'm getting callers, I'm getting people who are posting in chat rooms. So then the host would say, okay, somebody just posted this. And then I went on social media, and I was following it afterwards on Twitter. It's the only thing I'm on, and people kept the conversation going like another 2 hours with me. And it was all positive. It was pretty cool. Like, I had nobody trolling me. But yeah, that was pretty neat. Like I got into some really interesting discussions. One person called in to the show and asked about something to do with quantum physics and the Hadron Collider, and was there a possibility that the Mandela Effect, which is meaning like a lot of people remember things as a certain way, but they didn't happen that way. And actually, if you research, that's kind of interesting. And not that I'm real big into that, but I did say. So I knew enough about it, though, to talk about string theory and to talk about the quantum effect in the Hadron Collider and dark matter and things like that. So which was pretty fascinating because the person calling me in was an expert in this, but or calling the show. But yeah, just amazing, just amazing. And recently was working the FBI retired detective linguist on how they identified the Unabomber. They, David Kaczynski, Ted Kaczynski's brother, submitted many works that his brother had produced and said, I think they pattern similar to what, the manifestos are. And there was one line, and it's, you can't eat your cake and have it too. Not you can't have your cake and eat it too. So it was switched. And it was really, that caught the linguist, this FBI, is James Fitzgerald, Detective James Fitzgerald, since retired. And they found in a letter that Ted Kaczynski had written to the editor 30 years ago that he had used that as a closing statement in this letter. And then all of a sudden they looked and said, oh, we think we've got the person. So they got a warrant. It was the only time ever they've gotten a warrant on that type of evidence, like matching basically one sentence. And it turned out it was Ted. So pretty fascinating because, I have a background in speech language, and the more I do expert witness work and go through literally 17,000 pages of documents, you kind of hone these linguistic detective skills, and you really you grab onto certain ways that things are phrased and certain patterns of phrasing, and it's amazing. You can tell where somebody grew up from reading. Once you read 300-400 pages of somebody's testimony, like over time, there are certain patterns that show up, like this is East Coast, West Coast, Southern, this is different dialects, and these kind of start to show up. And not that you look for those, but they're just apparent. They just stand out because everybody, they have different, things. But very, very interesting. So you're like, oh my goodness, Dave, you just wasted how many minutes on that? All right. I'm going to grade your SWOT analysis this week. Thank you for submitting that. If you haven't, make sure you get that in. Strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats. So I'll get it back to you by the weekend, meaning next weekend. Well, so what, the 10th or 11th of February. And here's what we have on deck for week 4, February 5th through the 11th. We have suicide prevention, extremely, extremely important. And the DPI has exceptional resources in this. And also, if you can get together some districts, the DPI will typically come to the host district site and do a comprehensive training on suicide prevention. There are also other agencies in Wisconsin that focus on suicide prevention. So, and I have some of those linked out. You want to get someone that's reputable, and of course, an organization is reputable, and you shouldn't be charged for any of these services, by the way. I think that's a red flag right there. If you are, that get out of that and get into some place that is doing this through either grant funding or through the DPI. So yeah, suicide prevention, signs of suicide, and I'm gonna talk about that once we get into our notes here for the week. But I also have a link to Solar, solution oriented learning and resolution. That site hasn't been updated for a while, but it was put together by some Wisconsin educators, still very relevant to get some ideas on how you can approach discipline from a restorative practices perspective. So please check it out. I talk about the code of silence. I did a, kind of like a lit review meta-analysis when I was at doing my dissertation. It's the only class I did like that. And talk about the youth code of silence, which is interesting because when you break down the youth code of silence, largely, youth, if they see that you've done action based upon what they've told you, you will have this trust with youth. The problem is when youth feel like you're not going to respond to something that they tell you, then they're not going to tell you, and then that is severed. So that's really where that trust line lies, is whether they see that you've acted upon information. So it's super important with a threat reporting system. I mean, just imagine if you're reporting, if you're youth, you're reporting that you've been bullied or something, and you don't perceive that it's been investigated or hasn't been followed up with you, you're not going to report the next time. It's not, you're just not going to do it. So I have a start of school year connectedness / bullying PowerPoint. And I am sharing that some of these things that I share, that like when I worked with the DeForest or Reedsburg, The reason I am sharing those is those became public documents, either like through conferences I presented at and the district gave permission and the board then to make these public, or through like our county consortiums that then these became public documents. So they got shared out and everybody used them. So this isn't anything I'm taking from the district that was just district property. This was disseminated all over, at the time it was produced. So, and again, like I said, I've done that too. As a director, you have somebody from other districts might come up with training materials, or might come up with like, here's a release of information or sample policies. But I want to make that clear. If you ever share anything from your district, and some of you have in this class, I think that's great. But just make sure that, it's something that you can share, because, if things are put on the district, dime for you to generate things, and then it's being, you're sharing these things out. Sometimes that can be a friction point. But again, in the items that I have shared with you in this class are all items that were shared all across districts in the state of Wisconsin through conferences and through, the network that we had. So they became public domain at the permission of the superintendent and the permission of the school board. We had an interesting way when I was in DeForest of doing that, and you kind of put it like in a consent agenda, indicating that you were going to do these things, and the board kind of gave the sign off on it. But I just want to put that out there. So, on these things, and they are a little dated now, but I think they do get to the point. What I'm trying to convey is like the PowerPoint. So by doing that, I mean that now becomes a professional training document that I kept. So and then sign in of who was there and recording who was there. So if I'm asked if something happens and there's a claim, whether it be by a parent on what did you do to train staff for bullying, if it's a advocacy group working with a release with the parent, whether it's a complaint to the DPI or OCR, or if it's legal, which is probably rare, but I mean, you can bring this out and say, listen, here's what I did. Here's the actual document I used for training. Here is what people had. Here's the sign in. And if you do that, that puts you in a great position. Now, this is the document you use, that sign in, that's the record of, that people had received that. And one thing I always think you should put at the end too is like questions. Please ask questions, or if you have any questions, please contact at whatever. Because you want to put that in there too, saying, hey, we had a time for questions, and if people didn't have questions at the moment, it says right here, and we made this available, they could take it and they could follow up with questions. Goes a long way, folks, goes a long way. And you wouldn't believe the number of times I consult with districts, or, consult in legal matters, and I ask for professional development. Nobody has anything. I mean, they do not have it. It's just like it's gone. They're not sure what they gave, when they gave it. And I don't know how that happens these days necessarily when you have everything is electronic, but maybe it's turnover or it's just done very informally. I don't know. I don't. I mean, but more times than not, these types of documents just are not produced when they're requested. And you're in such a better position as a director. Plus the fact is that you can take this and you can update it for like the following year. This is something you can readily use with someone, who has joined the district after the in-service, that they can go through this. So anyway, school connectedness resources have links out to that. We have the CDC website. DPI also has a lot of that on their school wellness site. So that's pretty thorough. Seeking equity and diversity, LGBTQ. Also, I have a link to my good friend, Sheltrice McCoy at UW-Madison, who oversees the LGBTQ services and other diversity services on campus. Sheltrice is awesome. She is phenomenal. I need to get her on a podcast. We have such a great sense of humor between the two of us. And we had a meeting up in, it was absolutely hilarious. We were meeting up in Memorial Library down at UW-Madison. And actually we worked with Desiree Alva also on I'm not sure what the paper, it had something to do with a diversity analysis that we had done down at UW-Madison. It's probably about 50, 60 pages, but it was so funny because I just say this, Sheltrice, like we had decided we were going to order like Chinese food and it was late at night, And but the bottom line was I would be the one to go down and get it because and I'll say this, I mean, because we're working on this paper about positionality and everything, and I was the one of the three probably most likely to not get questioned because you weren't supposed to have food delivered and brought up into like the study areas like late at night. But I was older and I was a white male. So they said, you probably have the best chance of any of us of getting this in, and your chances are still probably pretty slim, but I don't know. I got it in, and we had our Chinese food that night, but, Sheltrice is absolutely amazing. If you are looking, in your district for connections of like how maybe some mentorship of your LGBTQ high school level programs and clubs and how those might interface with post-secondary, I mean, give Sheltrice an email or give her a call and she can help on things like that and resources too. Because I mean, that's a question that, comes up of like, if you leave the high school, how do you interface with not only diversity services as we would think of, students with disabilities, but also cultural diversity services that are on campus. So, I don't know. Sheltrice is just awesome. So we get into AODA awareness. And I'm going to share an interesting story about that right now. So I brought in, when I was the director, there was a lady who did AODA trainings and through some grant, and she was really good. She was really good. But she came in, and I believe it was my counselor, psychologist, social worker, some principals. It was after school. She did like a 2-hour presentation. It was done at district office. So this will blow your mind. She brings in these heavy cases, and they have wheels, and they're like this real heavy industrial plastic, like gray cases, and she wheels them into the room and has some tables in the front that she had asked for, and she starts setting stuff up. And she opens these cases and she's setting things up, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, I'm not. What's going on here exactly? So I go up and I talk to her. I'm like, hey, thanks for coming and doing this presentation about drug. And it was basically saying, here's how kids are smuggling in drugs that you're not even aware of. Like taking a gummy bear and soaking it in vodka, and here's how they're distilling down, Vicodin and putting it inside an inhaler, and I don't know, all this stuff. But it was good. I mean, she was very professional and talking about some of the lingo and this stuff. And I mean, she had the credentials, like I had checked, and she'd been in other districts, but she sets up in front and literally like puts out probably street value tens of thousands of dollars worth of drugs in this presentation. And I'm like, ooh, like this, there's a lot of red flags going off here. But I'm watching this. We have professionals in the room. She has her credentials, and with law enforcement, she has her credentials. So, I'm watching this, and she's demonstrating and showing people like, this is how this is done, and do this. And I mean, no one is taking things. But I'll tell you, it was the freakiest time of my life, because I was like, whoa, like I didn't think this was the presentation at all. And to see like, this is authentic. And she's like showing, well, this is what it'll actually be like. I mean, this is an actual one of these pills, or this is this, and here are these, whatever, and the street value, and here's the language, and here's recorded, and here's, actual places where people, kids buy these. And okay, this gummy bear was the original, and now here's the one that's been soaking in vodka. So like, go around and take a look, and then they'll dehydrate it down again. I mean, all stuff. And then having like a coffee filter, and then like how to mix up some of the different things in conventionally that you find in the Sudafed and the other stuff, and grind it down into grind the pistol and whatever, and mortar. And I think that was one of our assistant principals. That was his job to basically make some concoction. So, but this was all authentic. It freaked me, folks. Like I'm glad it was done. I went out with her and my administrative assistant. We also went with her to her car, like to take her things and help her if they were heavy, get them in the car, and just to make sure that I didn't have any questions about this lady. I mean, it's not like, but it was one of those presentations where I was like, ooh, like I wouldn't do this again in a school setting. I just think it was way too dangerous. But I mean, once we got into it, there was some value to it. But yeah, I mean, like, whoa, you can just imagine freaking out, right? Freaking out. So, and then I have an article about the Dane County School-Based Mental Health Consortium and how that had started with some, in cooperation with the county and some funding. And I'm not an expert on that at all. That happened in Dane County when I was not working in Dane County. But I know people who work as counselors and work in schools that participate in this, and I know them very well. And I just put it out there because one is I just want to get your feedback. Some of you actually are in Dane County, of how has this changed things, and not to look at it so much even as a pros and cons, but how has this changed things, and is this a blueprint now for a model that you might use somewhere else? Has this evolved so it's different now? I mean, the article's a couple of years old. One of the things that I think I wrote about was, I quoted a superintendent from a school in another county in Wisconsin where they did some county-supported services for mental health, but then the county pulled back their funding. And the school district was expected to maintain this level of service, and they didn't have the funding to do it, and also didn't have that partnership with the county where the county was providing these mental health providers. So they had to scale back, and eventually they pulled out of it. And the superintendent said, this was not meant to be basically almost like a grant thing where the county gave us so much money and then faded. That's not what I see in Dane County, but this is approached so many different ways. Like if you go to the Fox Valley, Kimberly, Kaukauna, those districts work a lot through United Way, and they've been going, for like 10 years straight with mental health services that are provided in the school through this consortium. But again, you can go to, some of you have talked about other places where maybe your school district is contracted with a local, counseling center for maybe 5 sessions, 8 sessions that they're coming into the school, or the child might be going into that setting for services. So everybody does this differently. But I just want to put this out there to foster more of a discussion and the things of like, what happens if you go into a consortium and there's more demand than what the services can allot, or does that mean districts kind of start to feel pressure with each other of making sure that they get their share or not, or how does that go? Because as a new director coming in, that's something you're going to want to know right away if something is in existence. Because again, prioritization, or even what happens if there's 3 snow days, how do those days get reallocated if those were 2 of those days were your district days? So I don't know. I think these are all great steps forward. I want to put that out there right away, but I want to hear about how people interpret these things, because they are, fairly new. I mean, when I started in 2002, back in, it was before that in school administration, but in special ed administration, this wasn't anywhere like that I was working. So, let us start with some shout outs. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Shout outs. Excuse me a moment here. Okay, so we have shout outs, and then we're going to do the week 4 annotation. So let us get into shout outs. I did number these. All right. Yes. All right. So Jana, and if your name is Yana, please email me. I'm sorry. Jana, remember I said I had everybody accounted for at least one shout out, and then I looked and I'm like, I didn't have you, so I'm sorry about that. You wrote, I am a teacher who is itinerant, and I have the challenges of not feeling at home anywhere. There are many challenges that come with being a traveler, A traveling teacher and having a spot and a home are among those challenges. I've had a hard time finding time to travel between different schools and be ready to provide the intervention. I believe that I do a good job of getting to know staff and various members of schools. However, if I didn't have the outgoing personality that I do, this would be nearly impossible. Meaningful relationships are the reasons people come to work, and I hope to still maintain and create more connections. So yeah, absolutely. When I worked at CISA, okay, from 2002 to 2007, I was an assistant special ed director and then eventually associate special ed director. But needless to say, I was assigned 4 districts where I oversaw their special education pupil services. So these are districts, that typically ranged from 200 to maybe 700 students. So I had 4 districts, and then my 5th day, I was assigned to a transition grant. So the Wisconsin Transition Initiative. So I had 1 day a week that I was, my Monday might be this district, Tuesday was this district, Wednesday was this district, Thursday was this district, and that's the way it worked. I had a cart, and I had a large kind of binder folder type thing for every district, and they were all color coded, and I had the name on it, and I had my briefcase, but I had this cart, and where the handle pops out on it, it's got wheels, and I would put it in the trunk of my car, and that's what I did. Is I would go mobile. So the day I was in whatever district, I'd have to drive an hour to get there and pull up my cart and get up and get my stuff. And I usually was stationed like in the psychologist office or someplace like that. They gave you some place. And there, when you worked, you were typically working with somebody else because you were very hands-on with what was going on. But yeah, I felt that was a good way to get to know a lot of systems, first of all. So I think there's positives in being an itinerant, but as you indicate, it can be pretty isolating at times because, you're not part of holiday gatherings, assemblies, things like this. So one of the things also is you need to remember if somebody's coming into your staff, like this year, this is going to be your CISA person for orientation and mobility or for, vision services, HR, whatever. You need to make sure if they're going to be in your district on a regular basis, like once a week or something, that they understand the fire drills, that they understand lockdowns, things like that. And you also need to make sure if maybe they're only going to be there once a month, that just as if you had visitors in the school, you do have some process that other people in the school are aware, like if there's a lockdown or something that, someone wearing a visitor badge, which is very pronounced, that they would, they take that person and get them to where they need to go. But that's something too, if someone is going to be in your building on a pretty regular basis, make sure that they understand these types of things. And I never viewed people that I contracted for as being contracted staff. I just viewed them as they were part of our staff and treated them that way. I think that was very important. I always wanted to do that. I never, if it was going to be a potluck day, I let people know that if they were contracted, so they could bring something in and they could, participate in that. Yeah, absolutely. So I think belonging is very important for itinerant, and I'm glad you brought that up because we all work with itinerant staff at some level, and especially in medium to smaller size districts quite a bit. So Jeffrey, you wrote in a response to Mark, and I'm going to read this entire response because I think there's many salient points to think about here, but you said, Mark, you make some great observations. You are so right about finding common ground. That is why the SOC consortium serves as a great example for me on the possibilities of such a group effort. We have talked about forming a mental health consortium. I now think that is flawed, not in its purpose, but in its broad scope. We need to narrow the focus, maybe a consortium for providing mental health therapy services. It defines a specific need and goal of all the districts. A consortium would be helpful to our small districts. There is not one private therapist in our entire county. There is not one AODA counselor in our county. Human Services has one of each, and their load has them scheduling initial appointments 8 to 10 weeks out. We had a young lady hooked on heroin. She came to the office on a Monday begging for help. She had no insurance. Other than Badger Care, we had no local resources to help her. Human Services made an appointment to see her in 9 weeks. Sad. We did not get her chaptered, quote, for 1 week. We did get her chaptered for 1 week in an Oshkosh hospital, meaning we had her for one week stay in an Oshkosh hospital. After she was released, she had to drive 1.5 hours to receive further treatment and counseling. She has seen 15 or 16 Human Services. I'm guessing people. We did everything we could, but our efforts failed. A defined focus consortium would be more effective in dealing with these intense issues. Okay. So, Jeffrey's talking from a small district in a county, Adams. I mean, what you shared, Jeffrey, Adams County, which doesn't have a lot of fiscal resources, and so where you're situated, just so you know, like Wisconsin Rapids, Marshfield, Wisconsin Dells, kind of like in that center area. But I mean, from any one of those, you're driving, probably 45 minutes. But anyway, so it's kind of this island for service, kind of like a desert, I should say, of services. So here's my reaction to this. So I want to say, I think your point of having a narrow defined focus for a consortium is very sound advice. And a lot of great things get started, but they get started way too broad and not at a pilot level. So that's the mistake that happens, because the weight of trying to maintain these things just gets so overwhelming that they just implode. So what you've done by going very narrow is excellent, because it is much easier to start narrow and to widen out services than it is to start wide and then scale down. I mean, that is much more difficult to do. So, let's think about IEP goals. We don't write 25 IEP goals. We don't do that for a student. We prioritize, and we're like, okay, what are the top 3 to 5 goal areas that we're going to work on? Although maybe there are 25 areas that we could work on. I mean, what are the top 3 to 5 realistically? Because if we dilute, we're going to become a mile wide and an inch deep. We're not going to be effective. So, start with pilots, and maybe your pilot with mental health services is maybe you're just going to say, we're just going to do this at the middle school level. And put the reason out there of saying, we recognize there's needed elementary, we recognize needed high school, like at all levels, but this is where we're going to start. And then we're going to take it from there. Or maybe you want to start at high school, or maybe you want to start, I don't know, but all of those things make sense. Starting small, then you get to understand what's called your horizontal and your vertical structures. And these are things that I always examine in expert witness, along with consulting straight out with districts. Is I'm like, let's understand your horizontal models. Like meaning, how do your counseling services, for example, work from school to school to school to school? Your vertical structures, like, who reports to you? Who do you report to? Who reports to, like, the counselor? Just, and so forth. So, I mean, and how outside agencies work in. So horizontal, vertical structures. And you can identify these when you start your pilots out. And there'll be things like you totally didn't expect of how you might interface with outside agencies, stuff like that. So it's very good. And people are willing to try something as long as they can kind of put that toe in the water and try it. And they don't have to commit, like sign here that this is a 3-year commitment and you're going to do this and this and this. It's much better. Now the thing, to keep this going with momentum is that, you have to have pretty regular meetings. You have to have some baseline that you're going to have, and, and growth from baseline. If you can get some people to testify about their experiences, talk about them, things like that. But I like where you're going with this. And I think it's really good advice, because I don't know, I've done it, maybe you've done it too, where you come in with a plan to do something and it just is, it's too big. You're starting off way too big versus scaling something small and getting it up from that pilot into something bigger. And maybe the pressure sometimes is, that you get like grants, or a board puts a lot of pressure on, or a new superintendent or something like that. Like, this has to be done now. Like I had a superintendent that was like that. On a certain project. It was a renovation project, and wanted like the entire thing done, like this, what would the blueprints be and all of the costing and all of the stuff in this extremely short amount of time. And I said, I have to work with the director of buildings and grounds, and that person has to work with the city, and like, it has to do with like where the water comes into the building. And I'm like, so I'm like, and there are a lot of things, plus like the original blueprints of this building are not fully accurate to what is the building layout is. So it's like, I can't have this to you in 30 days. Like, I am dependent upon other people. So like, can we scale this down to, a realistic timeline of when this can be done? And then this will be like the first phase and the second phase. And it didn't have to go as fast as this person was pressing it either, but just the way it is. You had a post, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it, but you talked about paraprofessionals and your district's moving of these paraprofessionals kind of all over the place. Again, I'm sorry if I'm taking liberty with this, but I ran into that situation too as a director in a couple places. And I thought it was really hard for the paraprofessionals, one, to be coming in and be like, okay, this student no longer needs these services, or they moved out, and we know you're assigned to this school, but we're going to move you. So afternoons will be over at this building, and now you're at this building. So like literally you might have a support staff member that has moved 4 or 5 times a year throughout the district. And then that person has to be starting over. They have to build a rapport with students and with teachers. And I get it. I get where that happens, and also from a human resources point where that happens. But I fought that very, very hard. And I would say, listen, like, these paras they understand the building, they understand the students, they built up rapport. And just because now we have one student move out and the para serving more than one student, to move that para over to where we feel that we have a greater need, but that need then could change in 2 weeks if like this one student gets placed off site, into a GED program or so. I don't know, all these scenarios, but I just thought it was tough. I didn't like it. I fought it, and I said, we need to give some stability into our paras and just be, and the other part was, I had a pretty sound argument for this of saying most of our paras were generating some dollars for the district through attendant care services with students. So it wasn't like this massive fiscal savings that we were realizing, and paras don't make a lot of money anyway. And then these people aren't going to stick around in these jobs. They're going to leave. And then when they leave, you have to spend a lot of money recruiting and hiring and training someone else who's probably not going to stay around under this scenario a long time either. So I think you're on point with that. I experienced that too. Really, it's a philosophical position of a superintendent and a school board on that, and that's where those decisions really get made. Or maybe building principals, but I've never met a building principal who's very excited to lose para staff to another building because of some shifting student needs. Those shifting sands are always going to happen. If that's that way, couldn't you argue that point with every teacher and every caseload for everything? I don't know. Donna, you shared that you judged your speech language numbers to be high for your district, and especially at middle school and high school. And you also said, I feel as though we are not exiting our speech language students as well as other disability groups when they no longer need services. So I've seen that. Ironically, I've been called in to do evaluation of a district where the superintendent and board had perceived that years ago. But here's what happens. So discharging a student from special education services is typically it's difficult unless they're aging out or if they're younger. But once they get to middle school, high school, it's not so much of this feeling of they've graduated or they can do this now without the support. The feeling is you're taking something away from them. The parents feel that you're taking something away. Other teachers might feel that you're taking something away. And that becomes that approach, when that discussion changes at meetings. Well, they're successful, but they're successful because we've had these supports in place. So when the supports aren't there, they're not going to be successful. And people get into this prophecy and stuff like that. So that's hard. You need to have those discussions ahead of time with people of saying, I think we're going to be discussing discharge at this meeting, and work with parents on using those terms. And it's easier to do that at a natural break, like at a semester or at the end of the school year or something like that. But here's the part though, obviously, you cannot say this is a discharge meeting because the DPI would be saying to you, you can't do that. I mean, the IEP team determines whether services need to be provided, special education related services to the student or not. That's not unilaterally done by you ahead of the meeting. But you can say to the parent and to other teachers that one of the things we will discuss at this meeting will be discharge. It'll be something we will discuss as a team. And then by that, you're not saying we are going to discharge a student, but we're saying it's part of the discussion, and the team ultimately will determine placement. That's fine. You can do that. That's okay. But I think it's important people, once they hear that information prior to a meeting and have time to think about it and just know it's going to be discussed, it goes easier at meetings. And there used to be this philosophy that you wanted to make sure if a student did have a disability in high school. I mean, this was maybe 15 years ago, but if they left high school and they still had a disability, that would pave an easier road into post-secondary disability services. Like you needed an IEP to get certain services at post-secondary. That's evolved a ton at post-secondary, those disability services plans. So I don't think that is nearly the issue that it was like 15 years ago. I think that's substantially changed in the post-secondary. So, but you're right. Those are tough. Those are tough things because it is that takeaway thought mentality, I guess. Priscilla, you wrote the following about contracting versus in-house services, and you put, in the role of director, I would think about some of the factors that might go into making that decision. First of all, I never knew this when I worked with you, Priscilla, but I love the way that you number things and how you capitalize the headings and how you bullet point. That is exactly what I do. So it is crazy because but you have such a great style to this, and maintain that when you're in the administrative role, because when you write things, it is so easy to pull out the salient points and to follow your narrative and your thought process. So you've got this down. I really like this style. And again, I think it saves people time. It conveys information, very succinct, very well done. So you wrote, first thing, critical mass of students. How many students need the services? How long will students be in the district? Given the number of students, is the service likely to be one that the district could maintain a stable employment position? Absolutely critical mass of students. I mean, if you have 2 students who are hearing impaired or 3 students, but they're 2 of the 3 are from the same family, and this family's moved 3 times in the last 5 years, I mean, how much of a commitment versus maybe contracting the service do you want to do? So yeah, that critical mass of students. It comes into play like English language learners, which fall a lot of times under people services. Arcadia had a rapid increase where they hit a critical mass where it was then time to hire ELL teachers and develop their own program and stop contracting. So that probably happens more in ELL than other areas, but it can happen, definitely in autism or in other health impaired VI, depending upon the size of your district and the growth. The second one you wrote is in-house expertise. It may be important to examine what type of expertise current employees have. Given the service you need, do you have the expertise in your current employee pool? Do you have to look outside the district? Thank you for that. Anyway, I'm gonna address that down below in my response. But yes, in-house expertise is often overlooked, and you don't recognize the experts that you have. Whether it be in autism, technology, or past training that they've had in other scenarios. They were in the military for 8 years, and they've had, 4 of those years was in medical. Well, that's somebody we want on our building, code blue team that rushes, grabs the defibrillator and whatever, or if a student has a seizure that responds, but okay. Your third point, level of control. You have more control over your own employees, less over contracted. This also goes to philosophy. With your own employees, you can pick someone who matches the vision and mission of your district. With contracted services, you get what you get. Very true. Very true. So yeah, that is a great point, because I had a nurse that was assigned to a student, and that by private insurance, Medicaid, so it just came with the student, and I needed to know who that person's boss was, and was having a problem with that person taking phone calls within the school setting. And that person argued, well, I have the right to take, phone calls and whatever. And I said, that the flat out thing is when you're taking phone calls, it's disruptive to the other students. We don't allow teachers and staff to accept phone calls in front of students, which you're doing. So I found out who this person's superior was. And of course the parents then were upset with me because what are you trying to do to this person who's been this, nurse for our child for so long? And I, basically, it came down to, I said, this can't happen. I mean, this is against our school policy. If this person, needs to take phone calls, and so the employer said, yes, there are times they need to take phone calls, but they also said there shouldn't be a lot of times they need to take phone calls because this person was telling me I'm getting a lot of calls from my employer, about things. Well, that didn't turn out to be necessarily true. They were getting a lot of personal calls too. But it came down to, it said, you can take the calls, but you can't take them in front of students, and you can't be talking in front of students. So you're right. Now, had that been our own nurse, we would have handled that through just the way that our district operated. Future of service. For some services like mental health treatment, for example, we want families and students to make connections with community providers. This can be done by contracting with service providers, not so much by providing the service yourself. You're right. I mean, eventually, everybody's a part of the community. So you want to be able to transition into the community, and the community supporting the child and the parents. And when the parents are no longer, when the children age out and they're not in school anymore, they need to be supported and be integrated into the community. So these are really great points, Priscilla. This is really well done. So I had a few things I want to add here. So again, I talked about, your format on this. I like that. But I also, when you number things and you go through them with people, it is so easy. Like with your other administrators, you're going through this. You can say like 0.3 and they know exactly what you're talking about. Or someone could say, Priscilla, I'd like to go back on you have 0.3 here about level of control. Boom. It makes those discussions go really well. So dun, 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 dun. All right. Oh yeah. Okay. So here, I remember I met with a small district about school safety planning. And one of the things they wanted to do was to have building level crisis teams that would regularly meet, like once a month to talk about, and they could convene if there was, whether it be a medical emergency or whether it be something else, that this team could convene, which was a good idea. And they started to figure out, they asked for volunteers and they didn't get a lot of volunteers, but they tried to figure out like who's got the internal expertise. And they learned that in their own buildings, they had some people who had been in the military, who had been in EMS or were actively in EMS or fire department, National Guard, things like this. And the fire department is kind of interesting because where the district was, like some of the people who were in the actively in fire department, it wasn't the fire department of the district. I mean, the district went, and there were several like little rural communities, and this is where people might live like 10 miles away, and they were in that fire department. So once they knew that, most of those people were willing to participate, but they weren't like necessarily teachers. One was a custodian who had been in the military for a number of years, and was trained extensively in instant command response, and then also in medical. So was a great resource to bring into this team. So I think that's the thing of cultivating, understanding the resources that you have in your own district, which you've done very well. Hey, that's it. Let us get into our week 4 annotated teaching annotation. I just said annotated teaching annotation. So, all right. Counselors, nursing, student relations. So, dun, 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 dun. First of all, it is often very difficult to separate social and psychological issues from health issues. Basically, a lot of things happening with kids, it's comorbid. There's more than one thing going on. And there's the old statement of, like someone's be like, well, the child has autism. So like they instantly know what every child with autism has. I mean, what the profile is, which you don't. I mean, every child's different and a lot of things are comorbid. So, it's like if you know one child with autism, one child with autism. If you know one child with depression, one child with depression, one child with CP. I mean, so forth. So it's that thing of where people, they go on to WebMD or whatever it might be, the Mayo Clinic, and you can get information, but you don't have the whole comorbid understanding of what's happening with that child and previous treatments and how they've the care that they've received, the family dynamics, other things that come into play with this. So I think that's very important because people do tend to do that. Like and they do it kind of out of the goodwill of their heart too. Like something happens, a student is diagnosed with something that's pretty obscure, charge syndrome or something like that. It's not very, very prevalent. And then they dig into all of this and it's like, okay, like I've got it. Like I know everything I need to know because like I've pulled these resources, which is good. It gives you, information, but you're going to learn from that student and observing that student and how that student's functioning in other environments, talking to that student, working with a student. That's how you're going to learn about the student. And they might have characteristics that fit these things, which typically go with charge syndrome, and other characteristics that don't. But and sometimes parents do that too. Once there's a diagnosis, they jump in, and that's where the internet can be both good and bad because everything's ubiquitous. There's so much information out there, and where does it usually trend? There's it's like the commercial, just the regular medications you might take, like Advil or something like that, and then it's like and could lead to whatever, and in rare cases could lead to death. It's like, whoa. So there's always all these exceptions with things. I'm just saying, if you know one kid with whatever, one kid with whatever, get to know the kid. Understand your assessment tools. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey, or the YRBS, is not a screener for youth mental health concern. It is not. It is not. YRBS is not a mental health screener. So I've seen it used as a mental health screener more than once. There are assessments out there for that. I'm not going to cite any offhand. I did a podcast on one. I forget what it was, but they've evolved. This is where remember that China Community Health Needs Assessment, I talked about that. Working with your community health needs provider, people who are working and licensed in mental health care, of what screeners and what assessments they use. But the YRBS is a survey. Okay. The other part of the YRBS, I'm not a big fan of the YRBS. I'll be honest with you, because I think it blends in a ton of data in, like, my district is much different than your district versus your district versus your district. And the lives that students, lead the communities are so much different. So when you take all that information and you kind of blend it together, I just think you lose so much. I don't think there's that inter-rater reliability. I always believed, and I've had other researchers, tell me this too, the best unit of study is this actual individual school in the community, the neighborhood the school's in. The next would be the district. But like once you get beyond that, like to compare, Rice Lake to Eau Claire, or to compare, Green Bay to Lake Geneva, there's not a ton of value in doing that. So consider, and the other thing with the YRBS, okay, look at the YRBS and the questions in the YRBS and ask yourself, hey, students with disabilities, with language, disabilities, understanding disabilities, or English language learners, how are they really interpreting these questions? And the YRBS also asks questions such as time framing, like, in the last 6 months or in the last 12 months. Well, that's hard for anybody to do. So I'm just saying, be aware of what it is and what it isn't. The best way to get information flat out about kids and the same types of questions, I guess, asked by the Youth Risk Behavior Assessment, but it's to do a focus group. It's to get a cross-section of some kids, to interview them, to ask them some questions, to ask them to talk about scenarios, and then that's recorded, that's transcribed. You then code it out. You qualitatively code it out. You develop constructs. I might be talking about some things you're not familiar with, but you can learn this stuff. It's not that hard. It takes some time. Like time, yeah. When do we have the time, Dave? But yeah, I can tell you will get so much more out of doing that. You will get so much more of talking to 10 middle school students and about these topics and say whatever you're going to say. Nothing's going to be held against you. So if you have to curse, whatever. Hopefully you don't, but let the emotions out, and you're going to get so much more from that. And then what you do is you take it and you work it into the coding and the constructs, and you bring it back to the students. Now, of course, like I'm not, if something's in there that, is raw or whatever, I'm going to put that in a terminology that's more appropriate. But but I am going to, you bring it back and say, here's what you said. Okay, here are like some main areas of life that's a struggle or a concern, or school that's a concern or whatever, and here's what's not. But here, and you can talk about some of these concern areas, like what can we do to make these better? What do you think? And here, I have some thoughts too, or we have some thoughts as a team, but let's try to, and this is, Jeffrey, kind of where you talked about, like, let's find the one or two things like that we really want to tackle. And kids will respect that. We talk about the code of silence. This will blow kids away. They're like, well, we didn't expect you to come back with this, for one. And the second, that, you want to take some of this on and with us. And yeah, so, really cool stuff happens out of that. So, just putting it out there. One of the cool things that happened, here's an example. It was a middle school. It was in Wisconsin. They did this type of activity, and the students were very angry that their friends would sometimes get a lot of garbage posted about them on social media that wouldn't be true, kind of be blasted, overwhelmed. And then it would go away. But then their plan, though, and working with the teachers after they said this, they said, well, when this happens, like if somebody gets blasted on social media, we're going to have a good counter blast. We're going to come in and we're going to post like good comments about this person and why we like them. And we're not going to discredit other people and go down to their level. We're just going to say, we really appreciate like this person and this, and thank it. And it worked. It like offset it. And then the person, the people that were doing the spamming and stuff, they just kind of, they're like, well, this isn't worth it for us anymore. And, it was a cool thing. I think they had some parent volunteers involved in that too. And I don't know, it modeled after something that was out there, that they gave a try, but okay. So, it is critical that pupil services leaders are professional at all times in problem solving the issues in the learner's life and educational situations. So be aware of factors that impact your decision making. Yes, like, value. What you talk about, decision making, values, your understanding of the rules, your understanding the options available to you, and that you have the ability to make a decision. So those all go into your decision making and discretion. Value what your discretion is. Also, be very aware of getting influenced or manipulated by posts on social media, article forums, and for example, I study these things, and I report on them in podcasts, but I also go into districts and I reveal things like, okay, so victim shaming is huge in sex trafficking. So someone is identified as having been groomed and participating in sex trafficking, and there's an article done about them, or a feature once they get to be an adult, and then the post that are in the comment section, like 90% are, this person deserved it and this and that and that, and they're victim shamed and blamed. So I talk about things like that. So just in this whole thing with discretion and social media, I guess what I wanted to get into there is, as a district, you can do something. One of the things that I'll never forget, I was a principal, and I canceled school because there was so much snow and the wind chill was below our threshold for where we canceled school. And parents were still trying to drop kids off. So I had to be outside the building, like saying, nope, no school today, no school today. And then teachers were like angry because then we had to make up this day. And it was like one of the things I just got hammered on like for a week by people was, and it was not so much social media. There wasn't so much social media out there at that time, but I assume if there would have been a ton of posts on social media by parents saying, this is ridiculous of the school. It was perfectly, drivable, or by 11 o'clock, the roads were bare. I mean, maybe they were, but like the bus company was saying, we recommend you do this. And I knew it, and that was my decision on that day because I don't know, the chain of command above me was out or whatever, but it was still like, that was one of the things in the great soap scandal when I was a principal, of being accused of telling the custodians to water down the soap to save money because we changed to a different soap. And it was much more viscous, and a lot of kids and staff, like this year, like a flu season where they're sick. And they're saying, you told the custodians to water down the soap to save money. Well, I didn't tell them any of that. I mean, soap's more viscous. So we actually had the custodians bring out an old container of the soap and a new one, and they were in these bag things that would go in the dispensers, and cut them open and let them out so you could see like one was viscous and one wasn't. And they showed like the stuff saying it still killed the same number of germs. And I said, we can try to get the other type in, but the custodian crew said, we've already ordered. This is what we have. We have to use this up. But yeah, it was this conspiracy that, we were trying to do this. It's crazy. These things you run into, but, in difficult, complex, and challenging matters, a bona fide personal and professional knowledge base is of vital importance. Recall the various types of truths, and the respective internal and external threats that are confronting such. So think about the motivating factors. When something is going down in a school, what are the motivating factors? This is the difference between asking the question why something is happening and what is happening. So, let's go back to the soap scandal. Okay. Why was that happening? If I'm trying to ask, like, why are the teachers like so upset about this? Why are they just after me on the soap scandal that I'm trying to save money, and skimping and doing things the wrong way with this? I could go around and around forever on that, and who's trying to lead this or whatever. The question, if I ask what is happening in that case, is what's happening is a lot of people are sick, they're not feeling well, they're out, and we're not getting subs, or we're getting a lot of subs in the building. Maybe people who, so routines are all off. Again, it's the middle of winter. Things are getting long at that time of year before we get another break. So, it was typically the time of season when people were grumbling the most anyway, including me. I mean, it was just that time. Northern Wisconsin winters get long. And another principal brought out and met with me and said, Dave, I've been tracking this for 10 years or whatever. And here's the number of staff complaints and the number of student complaints over the year. And it spiked right then, right now, and said, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And people are just going to see things this way because it's frustrating. A lot of people inside cold. We had recesses because it's been too cold. So we've had, consecutive recesses inside. So that was really the what of what was happening. We were in a trend. And then of course, with this soap being different, anything that would have been a little bit different could have thrown anybody off. So it was one of those things that was convenient, I guess, to identify as being as a blame. So anyway, educate students as to sexual relationships with other students. This has become absolutely critical to have your counselors have that discussion with students, so you do not end up, with a high school student who now has to register as a sex offender. I know a parent of a child who her son has to do that, and I don't know what the number of years is because of having, I don't know, he was 16 and his girlfriend was 15 or something like that. And anyway, it ended up becoming a legal case, and he ended up having to be on the sex register, the offender register. And imagine, the impact that has on his life. It's horrible. And I mean, and it can happen the other way around. I mean, it can be female to male. But just that this is something, these discussions absolutely do need to happen because this can, first of all, safe relationships and that, but then also understanding, how this works from a statutory standpoint. Okay, let's see. All right. As school officials, we rarely know what goes on in a pupil services student's home, let alone the family dynamics. For example, how much actual, not inferential, time has a school administrator ever spent in a problem child's home environment? Basically saying here is, all right, the point I made on this was be aware of staff that are making, or administration or anyone who's making recommendations for the child needs to be on ADHD medications, or they need to go see this one counselor, because this counselor's come to a lot of school IEP meetings and whatever. And making these types of referrals, but statements, which almost become referrals. I don't see it as much anymore. I did see it a lot early in my career. What I see now is kind of flipped around the other way. It's the physicians making referrals to the school. So the parent is bringing in something and saying, that the child needs to be in special education or, needs whatever. And that's where, working with those physicians and saying, the process doesn't work this way. We have to go through an evaluation process. And some of this, because they're being treated medically for anxiety doesn't mean necessarily that, we have a comparable school treatment program and stuff like that, two different settings. So here we go. With respect to special needs, learners, ELL, also attempt to find them doing something well, something right in school, no matter how insignificant, positively reinforce that versus waiting for a mistake. So here's a story I want to tell. This one might be getting a little long, but okay. So I worked with another administrator who told me this story of when she was a EBD teacher early in her career. So probably like it was the 1980s for her, and it's a small district in Wisconsin. And she told me this story, and I'm telling it to you because I think as a student services director, this is the type of person that I would want working for me. And there was a certain way that the student services director and the principal handled this matter too, which I think shows a real maturity and real use of discretion and using a value system, which would not have been possible under like a zero tolerance. So anyway, let me tell you a story. It was the middle of winter, and this teacher, okay, I'll give you her name, Diane. Okay, you'll never be able to figure it out. So, and she wouldn't mind if I told the story anyway, but makes it more personal. Diane. So Diane, teacher of high school students with emotional behavioral disabilities. And of course, there's so many comorbid things that went in that. And she was great. Like she would bring in, crackers and snacks and stuff, juice for kids and, things that they might not have at home. And wonderful in every regard as a teacher. And we all know teachers like that, right? So, and a big influence, probably the most important influence in some of these kids' lives at that moment in time. And it was an extremely cold day, extremely cold, and it just got more bitter as the day went on. And she wasn't married at that time, and she went out to her car like at noon or something to try to start her car just to let it run for a little while. Because it was a really cold day back then in the 80s. It wasn't like today. Like I had a Chrysler LeBaron, and my goodness, I mean, the moment the first snowflakes fell, you had a 50-50 chance of that thing starting up or not. I mean, and plus I had like a heater on the engine, things like you don't need today because cars are just so much better. But my LeBaron, it was like I wish I had a crank start on that thing. I probably would have had a better chance of getting it going. It was anyway. So she has her car. It won't start. She can't get a start. And of course, this is pretty big, because like she doesn't really have anyone around the area to call. I mean, she's not from there. So she comes in and shares with, I don't know if she was a little upset or whatever, but did share with students that she needed, I don't know, to check on some things or whatever, and she'd be back in a little bit, so there'd be another teacher there or whatever. But she said she did let them know like her car wouldn't start, and so anyway, like the hour passes or that gets into like, afternoon, about an hour toward the end of the day. And one of the students, says, well, I'm pretty good at this, or a couple students, can we just check it out? Like, and of course, back in that day, yes. I mean, you'd like kids to do that. And shop classes, I mean, kids, we were always ripping apart cars and doing stuff like that anyway. So some students, looked at her car. She wasn't supervising any of that stuff. And anyway, they came back in and they said, Mrs. Whatever, Mrs. D, your car starts. Your car's fine. Like your car's good. Everything's good. We got your car started. And she's like, oh, thank you. Like, this is amazing. What was it? Well, whatever. We, jumped it, and there were some other things and some cables, whatever. So she's like, oh, it's awesome. So she got home that night. Next day, there's an announcement from the principal, and he said, sometime between yesterday, afternoon and this morning, it seems that the battery, I don't know if this was done over the PA or this, they always did the PA announcements, but then they used to do the paper announcements, which went in the mailbox, which also included some information that didn't go out to all the students, just for the staff. But anyway, she reads, she understands, and she's like, oh my goodness, the battery in the driver's ed car is different than, it's dead. It's not the original battery they looked. Because they would rent those cars. They'd be new, and you drive them for a semester, and they have 5,000 miles. They give them back. But anyway, they're like, this isn't this battery is not even for this car. And then she goes and talks to the principal, and she said, I think I know what happened. And they checked, and her battery was the one that was in the driver's ed car. And she said, the kids knew my car wouldn't start, and they felt bad about this. They felt really concerned, for me, and they checked it out, and they must have switched the batteries. And so she said, this was a really cool thing on one side for them to do, because it was for my well-being, and they didn't want me to worry. And on the other hand, definitely, I know this isn't the right thing to do. And here's what I want to do. And here's what she said. Let me buy the new battery for the driver's ed car. And then let's just leave it at that. Okay. Just, if I can talk to my students about this, of saying, this was really cool that you looked out for me. But of course, this wasn't the way ultimately to do this, but I've handled this. And the principal, and she told me this story, and she used this story many times, but she was telling me this, and she said, the principal just said, he goes, the fact that those kids are so vested in you, they would move mountains for you, and they didn't damage anything. There wasn't any damage done. I mean, it was very respectful how they got into where the driver's ed car was. And yeah, I think they parked it in this area that was off of the shop. So, I mean, it had easy access and stuff like that. So there wasn't any damage done, and all of this. He just said that's really incredible that you mean this much to them, and that they did this. And I agree. I'm going to let you handle this. And yeah, if you've said you'd buy the battery, okay, we'll get that taken care of. And yeah, so that was all done. The kids never met with the principal. The principal didn't come down. The teacher handled that discussion with the students, and everybody. It was an incredible experience. But it's an example, and these again are students with disabilities. But think about that. Think about the different ways that could have been handled. You could have gone right after those students of, this is school property, and you did this, and you're going to have, 3 days of suspension and whatever and whatever and whatever. And what were those students doing? I mean, ultimately, what were they doing? And this is what she believed. They were looking out for her because they didn't want her to panic, and they wanted her to get home safely, and not to have, for example, the battery start, but then somehow the car shuts off and she can't, get home. So, the intention behind that. And then think about, the principal, needing to make that decision too, and trusting that teacher and using discretion in that manner. I mean, there was no need to do a discipline write-up and document and create a record for anything like that. There was no need for that. So I'm just saying that was an incredible story. And that's where we come into understanding where discretion comes into place, and applying that value system and acting in the best interests of the student, and that not everything is going to be black and white, and zero tolerance can really destroy what was a genuine kind act. With the students and that teacher. So I am on page 3, although these are not numbered. Getting into note that many school-based health issues fall under the area of risk management. So risk management means, for example, like how food is prepared in your lunchroom. Okay, that's risk management, making sure you don't have cross-contamination. Washing hands is risk management, that you have plenty of soap, that you're teaching hand washing, that you have sinks available, ample time between classes, that's emphasized. So that doesn't have to do necessarily with one specific student. We know, though, that hand washing decreases the likelihood of cross-contamination or contamination with food, but then we also know that during cold and flu season, it has a dramatic impact on decreasing sickness. We just know that. So that comes into that area of risk management. And I mentioned too allergies. I'm not going to go too much into that, except, we know that there are all kinds of allergies. We've talked about that before. Be very aware of that. Schools are witnessing an increase in the number of children with medical needs as more children are surviving premature births and other medical conditions due to advanced care. Schools are in the midst of being transformed into post-acute care facilities, providing everything from insulin administration to suctioning of children with trach tubes. So I think the part there to convey is that you ensure that your staff are properly trained for the population of students that you serve. That means that traditional trainings of maybe 10 to 15 years ago, when staff are attending conferences on, whether it be behavior modification or autism, that thing's still important, but you need to be seeking out conferences on also, medical care. Okay. Not to the level of, like what a nurse or a doctor or things like that would go, but medical awareness. And I think that's important. We're seeing more conferences come out that way. I forget the different organizations that do them, but they're all across the state. We're not seeing those so much yet with state conferences as much as put on by PESI out of Eau Claire is one. BERN, I don't know what they stand for, is another one. They're in the state, but they kind of focus in on areas like this. But just to be sure. And the thing is, too, on some of these conditions, make sure that you're doing the research on these and you're sending staff to trainings and you're not defaulting to the parent to be the one to educate you about these, because the parent will have a bias. It's their child. So they want to make sure, they're going to advocate strongly for their child, where, you might be getting information directly from a physician, or if it's like United Cerebral Palsy, they're going to give you information which might be more broad, obviously, than what a parent is going to provide to you. Not that the parent's information isn't valuable, but the parent isn't the one that's doing your professional development. That needs to be done by outside providers, or else in concert with the parent. So on the very last page, I put it in bold. Your nurse's top priority at the start of each school year is your high needs medical kids, making sure that those protocols are put out, people are trained. And that, there was a district just recently that contacted me, and we were going over setting up some of these things. And they were talking about that they just completed their type 1 diabetic training, kids with type 1 diabetes, since the start of school year. They just completed it in, I don't know, it was after Christmas sometime. Like, they just got to their last group of people that they wanted trained in this. That's unacceptable. That needs to be done the first part of school. And if not, the first day staff are there, the second, it's done. That's priority. This is life and death. So that's something right away. And if you have buffers that run into that with other administrators, well, we really want we want to have this where nurses are understanding what our PBIS system, and we have them scheduled into this training and this PLC. I'm like, that's all great. Okay, that's great. That's important. But right now I need my nurses to train staff on type 1 diabetic insulin administration for these students. Okay. And I need, suctioning, and I need to get to these people about like seizures, because of, these students have seizures and possible diastat. I need this takes priority. And as a director, you step in and you say, yes, this takes priority. So document all those trainings again. And then here's, obviously how you train, you don't train in a big group in that type of thing. You train typically one-on-one, or maybe like with two people. You show it a couple times, maybe 3 times. You have a process. You show it, they demonstrate it twice successfully, and then you sign off. and then they sign off too. And they sign off saying, if I have any other questions, I'll contact you. But that's the thing. You have people actually demonstrate it, like how you put somebody in a stander, how you put a child in a stander, and you know that they have like 30 minutes in a stander or something like that, and then how you get them out of a stander, how you use a gait belt on a student, you know, that it's positioned. You know, a lot of times probably the biggest thing, and people don't know with gait belts, you know, they keep them way too low. So, you know, it's the kids, you know, it's riding down, you know, under their, it was like low riding pants when the gait belts need to be up higher, because if you have it for the center of gravity, I mean, this is what physical therapists and you know, and the nurses will share. So it's things like that, those types of trainings, and then document and record. So, I indicate, you know, even small districts, in even small districts, over 1,000 school lunches are served each week. Just looking at lunches and allergies and things like that. Allergies can be in a lot of areas, but a couple of things to remember with allergies is, one is the first allergic reaction can be completely unexpected and it can be very severe. Okay. It's not like it's going to start small and then get worse. People kind of think that. And you can get tested for a lot of different allergy things, and it's called a RAST score, R-A-S-T. That's only so reliable, okay? It means, you know, they give you those little pricks and whatever, and they kind of do it with kids that have, you know, if they give allergy shots because of hay fever and some other things. And I have a friend who has that, has gone through all that. But the deal is, I had another friend who worked at Red Lobster, okay? Worked at Red Lobster all his way through college and was fine. And then one day went in and was handling some shellfish and whatever, and just had this severe allergic reaction. And from that day forward, never had a reaction before, had a reaction to shellfish. To this day, like can't go by it again. It has the same type of reaction. So it's those types of things where it can happen at any time. And just because like you had a mild reaction to the one peanut butter sandwich, or, you know, to milk or the certain type of clay or latex or whatever it was, doesn't mean like the next reaction is, you know, like we can say this child typically, you know, has mild reactions. Doesn't know, like you don't know if the fourth reaction is going to be severe. Like it doesn't work that way. Of you can just say it's whatever. I wrote an article out there. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere. You can find it on the net. I wrote it a while ago. But one of the things, I mean, there's all different things you work on in student services. But one of the things too is, I would say, you get to know your kitchen staff really well, and also how the ordering process goes for food. So you know what the carb counts and things like that, like kids with insulin, and then what's being ordered. But one of the things that's pretty easy to do if you think about it ahead of time, and I worked with some really talented food service directors, and they would order like from one company, US Blue or Cisco or whatever, and they would order all of the applesauce for the entire school year, like right away. Okay. Well, then we knew like what the sugar was, the carb, we had all of that figured out. But you can get into this thing where you can try to save money by bidding stuff out every, you know, quarter. And then you have different vendors, and now you have to try to get in and figure out, oh, what's changed? Like this applesauce, now this is different. Like there's more sugar. The carbs are different. This, you know, the serving size. So, it's best to try to know what you order all at once and to get that figured out. And that's really the job of your food service. But it's one of those things that nobody thinks about until you kind of sit down and think about it and be like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. Or if you have some weird insulin reactions happening with kids and lunches, and you're trying to figure out like, well, what's happening? Oh my goodness, like we changed vendors. Again, you don't think this falls under your purview or your job description. There's so many things that'll fall under your job description. Not that it's bad. Okay. I don't want to say that, but I'm just saying, be aware. In some cases you'll have nothing to do with this in your district, but it served me well. I think the article is called Apples to Applesauce. And I probably wrote it like 10 years ago, but it's out there in one of the magazines. You can find it. So I don't know if I share it in this class or not. It also helped me build a really good rapport with kitchen staff. And I actually ate with the kitchen staff once a month. Like I would go in at the end, and then they would usually like sit down and eat, what hadn't been, what was left over from serving. They would have it, and I would sit down, and it was a good way to build rapport too, and get to know people. So, and I'm just going to close with this thing of like allergies and stuff like that. I mean, some of this you're going to need to bring an awareness to the school board, because they're not going to know about this, and they're not going to know if you're advocating, that you need additional aid coverage in lunchrooms at certain times, or, that you need to, your nursing services needs to increase from whatever to whatever because you now have students with type 1 diabetes and seizure and trach and things like that, whatever. They're not going to know, how are school boards? I mean, they're elected. These are people who just run for, to get on. They don't know this stuff. Not that they're bad people, but they just don't know this, what they know from school is they went to school, like all of us, and that's our experience. So they have to learn. So if you have an experienced board, it's easier. But if you have a board with a lot of turnover, this is where you need to periodically be presenting, talk to your superintendent and say, I want to do a presentation with food service. And we're going to talk about some of the allergies and just some of the ways that we work together, and just so we educate the board on some of these things, because I may be coming to the board and to you, superintendent, and asking for additional staff in whatever area because of a change in needs. And I want to lay the groundwork right now with the board for understanding this stuff. And it still happens to this day. And it happens in Wisconsin. Just a couple of years ago, there was a school board that turned over, and some of the new, they're going through budget, and some of the new members asked, hey, why are we spending so much money on students with disabilities? Like, this seems like this is out of proportion. Can we cut this back? Like, this doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. Like, we're getting a return. I mean, this is like what was said at the meeting. So, and of course, the parents with disabilities were like, oh my goodness, I can't believe, we have a board that's not supporting students with disabilities. And the board's looking, and they're fiscally crunched. So they're looking at any way that they can cut dollars, and they don't realize there's also an obligation under IDEA, under an obligation for FAPE. But the bigger thing is, these are all of our students, and we educate all of our students. Okay. That's our mission statement. That's our board premise. But, in that case, in that district, those were people who just did not know how all of this works until they got into it. And they asked questions that probably weren't bad questions to ask, like, help us to understand the funding process for different things and the different things we're obligated to do as a school, because we are going to have to make some reductions, and we want to know, as we prioritize through that of what is obligated, and then, what are some areas. And I think it is important too, as a student services director, you're going to have to at some point justify services, like why we need this social worker. If there's a change in Medicaid funding and we don't have dollars coming in anymore, then, if we do have to make a reduction in, whatever it is, that you be able to have those discussions. But wow, just that you're thinking about things like that. So it's an interesting week, And I look forward to reading your posts, responding to your posts, going through your SWATs. The old joke there is SWATs up instead of what's up. Okay. And I am going to be working with Hector on Wednesday night. We have most of the night blocked off for working on different versions of this grooming video, and professional development, which we're doing, and then also podcast. But, and that's going to be specific to this class, to you. The 12 of you are getting this. From Hector and use this. And I am again working with Sprigio on some contract work I do with them in one regard for grooming. If they will give me permission, remember we talk about these documents that kind of get shared, to give me permission to share a professional document that goes out to their client base, which pays for their services, and that I could share that with you. It would probably have to be like in a PDF and be marked in draft and stuff like that. But I believe the company would do that. I'll talk with them again, because I think it's important. And then maybe, too, for their part, some of you might be considering services down the road, for online bullying, safety reporting, and maybe, that would be one of the services you might consider. So I flat out, I get nothing. I get nothing if any student, any district in the class signs up for any services or anything like that with what Spriggy or no, just completely clear. Not anything, nothing. But I'm just saying, normally they don't publicly give these things out because they get paid through their client base for their services, and then I generate different things. But I want this document to be available to you because I think it's extremely helpful. And I have not found a good document on how to help schools have that dialogue and empower counselors with detecting grooming behavior. And again, getting kids to report, because we know that, it's 1 out of 100, 1 out of 80 to 100 that are reporting. And then also this whole issue of victim shaming and blaming that goes on. So thank you so much. Continue to be active posters. I'm having a blast with this class. You guys are awesome. I mean, you're awesome. And thank you for everything that you do for your schools. Please stay well, and take care of yourself. And just looking here at the calendar, so I will continue to do a fireside chat through week 7. So we know we've hit the midpoint right now for the fireside chats. And then after week 7, you have basically 5 weeks to do your research. It's your research module where you're learning about your own district's pupil services, non-discrimination practices, maybe interviewing some people. I mean, how do you work with, diversity versus, socioeconomic, racial, LGBT, any trends happening in your district, any opportunities for consortiums, things like that. What's happening? What's happened in the past that, is no longer, what might be happening in the future? And just your whole perceptions into these things. And, hey, we tend to provide a lot of opportunities like sports and whatever, but we're not providing as many clubs that everybody can kind of just join if they want to. So, things like that you can point out. So yeah, thank you. I know this one went long. I take a lot of notes, folks, when I put these things together, and I try to be concise, but I have a lot that I want to share to help you to be best equipped to do the job. Any questions, please contact me. Otherwise, take care of yourselves, and let's have a great week 4 here in pupil services and non-discrimination.